The doors of the great hall slammed shut behind Elena Voss, and the sound echoed through her chest like a warning bell. 1,000 eyes were on her. The air smelled of candle smoke and crushed flowers, but underneath it, Elena could sense something wrong, something sharp, something waiting to strike. She had imagined this night for years. The ceremony that would make her the Luna of the Cross Pack, the bonded partner of Alpha King Damian Cross, the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories. She had rehearsed her walk down the aisle 100 times in her mind, had imagined the moment his eyes would meet hers and soften with warmth. But now, standing at the edge of the platform in her pale gold gown, she felt only a cold, creeping dread. Damian stood at the top of the stone steps, tall and unmoving, his dark eyes fixed somewhere past her shoulder. He did not smile. He did not step forward. The pack elders sat in their carved chairs along the walls, watching in silence, and Elena's mother, Ravenna, stood near the front row, her hands folded tightly in front of her, her face unreadable. Elena took a breath and began to walk. Every step felt heavier than the last. The musicians had stopped playing. Even the torches along the walls seemed to burn quieter, as if the whole room was holding its breath. She reached the base of the steps and looked up at Damian, searching his face for any sign of the man she had grown up admiring from a distance, the man whose laughter she remembered from childhood summers, the man who once pulled her out of a river when she was 12, and scolded her gently for being too reckless. There was none of that warmth now. His jaw was tight, his shoulders were rigid, and when he finally spoke, his voice was flat and cold, carrying easily to every corner of the silent hall. "Elena Voss," he said, "I cannot accept you as my Luna." For a moment, Elena thought she had misheard him. The words did not fit together in her mind. She had trained for this role since she was a child. She had studied the old laws, the pack histories, the diplomatic customs of every allied territory. She had done everything asked of her. What? The word slipped out of her before she could stop it, small and broken in the vast hall. Damian did not repeat himself. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the crowd, and his voice grew louder, more formal, more final. The bond between an alpha and his Luna must be built on strength that can protect this pack for generations. "I have made my decision. Elena Voss will not carry the title of Luna." A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Elena felt her face grow hot, then cold, then hot again. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to demand an explanation in front of everyone who had gathered to watch her be crowned. But her throat had closed up, and all she could do was stand there, frozen, as the humiliation settled over her like a heavy cloak. She turned instinctively to look for her mother, the one person who had always been steady in moments like this, the one person who had promised her, only that morning, that everything would be fine. Ravenna was still standing near the front row, but something about her expression made Elena's stomach twist even harder. It was not shock, it was not anger on her daughter's behalf. It looked, if Elena was honest with herself, like relief. That single flicker of an expression cut deeper than Damian's rejection had. Elena's mother should have been the first to rush forward, to demand answers, to shield her daughter from the stares of 1,000 strangers. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her chin lifted slightly, as though she were waiting for something. Elena did not have long to wonder what that something was. Damian descended 2 steps, closer to the crowd, and lifted his hand. The gesture silenced the last murmurs in the room. "Tonight," he said, "I name a new Luna for the Cross Pack, a woman whose strength, wisdom, and loyalty have already proven themselves through years of service to this territory." Elena's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. She told herself it could not be what she feared. There were other women in the pack, other families who had waited generations for this kind of honor. It did not have to be. "Ravenna Voss," Damian said. The hall exploded into gasps and whispered exclamations, but to Elena, the sound felt distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. She watched, unable to move, unable to speak, as her own mother stepped forward from the crowd and climbed the stone steps toward the Alpha King. Ravenna did not hesitate. She did not glance back at her daughter, did not offer even a flicker of comfort. She walked toward Damian, with the composed grace of someone who had rehearsed this moment long before tonight. Elena's mind raced, trying to fit the pieces together and failing. Her mother was already bonded to her father, or so Elena had always believed. Her father, Edmund Voss, had died when Elena was only 6 years old, leaving Ravenna to raise her alone within the pack. Elena had grown up believing her mother's loyalty belonged only to her late husband's memory, and to the daughter he had left behind. She had never imagined, not for a single moment, that her mother harbored ambitions of her own. Damien took Ravenna's hand in his, and the crowd fell utterly silent as he spoke the ceremonial words that Elena had expected to hear directed at herself only minutes earlier. By the strength of the moon and the loyalty of this pack, I name you Luna of the Cross territory. Elena felt something inside her break, quiet and complete, like a thread snapping deep within her chest. She stood alone at the base of the steps, forgotten in the wave of murmurs and stunned applause that slowly rose around her. No one looked at her. No one reached for her. She was the girl who had almost been crowned, and now she was nothing more than a footnote in her own mother's triumph. She did not remember deciding to leave. One moment she was standing frozen at the foot of the stone steps, and the next she was pushing through the crowd, her gold gown catching on the elbows and shoulders of pack members who barely glanced her way. The heavy doors of the hall groaned as she shoved them open, and the cool night air hit her face like a slap, sharp and clarifying. Outside, the moon hung high and pale over the pack grounds, indifferent to the chaos unfolding beneath it. Elena walked quickly, then broke into a run, her bare feet slipping out of the delicate shoes she had worn for the ceremony. She did not stop until she reached the edge of the training field, far from the lights of the hall, where the only sound was her own ragged breathing and the distant hoot of an owl somewhere in the trees. She sank down onto the cold grass, drawing her knees up to her chest, and let the tears come. She cried for the humiliation of being rejected in front of the entire pack. She cried for the years she had spent preparing for a role that had been stripped from her in the space of a single sentence. And she cried, most of all, for the look on her mother's face, that terrible flicker of relief that told her something far bigger than a broken engagement was happening around her. A twig snapped somewhere behind her, and Elena stiffened, quickly wiping her face with the back of her hand. She turned, expecting a guard sent to fetch her back, or worse, Damien himself coming to explain his cruelty. Instead, she found her childhood friend, Grace Whitmore, standing at the edge of the field, her expression caught somewhere between concern and disbelief. "I saw what happened," Grace said quietly, walking closer. She did not offer empty comfort or false reassurance. She simply sat down beside Elena on the cold grass, her shoulder brushing against her friend's. "I don't understand it. None of us do." "I don't either," Elena admitted, her voice hoarse. "One moment, I was walking toward him, and the next, everything I thought I knew about my life fell apart." Grace was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark tree line. "Your mother," she finally said, careful with her words. She didn't look surprised. "I know," Elena whispered. She looked like she'd been waiting for it. The two young women sat in silence for a while, the cold seeping through Elena's thin gown, though she barely noticed it. Her mind kept circling back to the same unanswerable questions. Why would Damien humiliate her so publicly, instead of simply informing her privately that the match was off? Why choose her own mother as a replacement, of all the women in the territory? And what had Ravenna done, or promised, or hidden, to earn a crown that should never have been offered to a woman already past the age most Lunas were chosen? "You should go home," Grace said gently after a while. "Not to face them tonight, just to rest. Things will look different in the morning." Elena almost laughed at that, a hollow, humorless sound. Nothing about this would look different in the morning. The damage was done. The entire pack had watched her be discarded like an afterthought, and they had watched her mother rise in her place. There was no version of tomorrow where that truth softened. Still, she let Grace help her to her feet, and the two of them walked slowly back toward the smaller houses on the edge of pack territory, where Elena had lived with her mother since childhood. The celebration in the great hall continued behind them, the sound of laughter and congratulations drifting faintly on the night air, a cruel reminder of everything Elena had lost in a single evening. When they reached the small stone house, Elena hesitated at the door, unwilling to step inside and confront the empty rooms that no longer felt like home. Grace squeezed her hand once before turning to leave, promising to check on her in the morning. Elena watched her friend disappear down the path before finally forcing herself through the door. The house was dark and silent. exactly as she had left it that afternoon, while dressing for what she had believed would be the happiest night of her life. Her wedding shoes, the delicate ones she had chosen weeks earlier, sat by the door where she had left them, untouched. She walked past them without looking, moving instead toward her mother's room at the end of the narrow hallway. She did not know what she was looking for. Answers, perhaps. Some clue that would explain the impossible choice Damien had made. Some evidence that would help her understand why her own mother had let her walk into that hall believing she would be crowned, only to watch her be cast aside in the cruelest way imaginable. The room was tidy, as it always was. Ravenna kept her belongings simple and orderly, a habit Elena had always admired but never questioned. She ran her fingers along the edge of the wooden dresser, feeling foolish for searching through her mother's things like a thief in the dark. But something pulled at her, some instinct she could not name, urging her to look closer, to dig deeper than she ever had before. Tucked beneath a folded shawl in the bottom drawer, Elena's fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular, wrapped carefully in a strip of faded cloth. She pulled it free and unwrapped it slowly, her hands trembling in the dim moonlight filtering through the window. It was a small wooden box, old and worn smooth at the edges, the kind of box that had clearly been handled many times over many years. There was no lock, only a simple clasp, and Elena's heart pounded as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a single folded letter, the paper yellowed with age, sealed with a wax stamp that Elena did not recognize. Beside it rested a small silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon, its surface tarnished but unmistakably fine, the kind of jewelry that spoke of wealth far beyond what a modest pack family could afford. Elena's fingers hovered over the letter, torn between the urge to read it immediately and a strange, superstitious fear of what it might reveal. Somewhere in the house, she thought she heard the front door creak, and her heart leapt into her throat. She quickly closed the box, wrapping it back in its cloth, and slipped it beneath her arm before hurrying to her own room and shutting the door softly behind her. She sat on the edge of her bed, the box clutched tightly in her lap, and listened to the sound of footsteps moving through the house. Her mother had returned from the celebration, and Elena's pulse hammered as she strained to hear whether those footsteps would pause outside her door. They did not. The footsteps moved past, toward Ravenna's own room, and a moment later, Elena heard the soft click of a door closing. She let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, and looked down at the box in her lap, at the mystery it held, at the secret her mother had kept hidden for reasons Elena was only beginning to suspect ran far deeper than a simple broken engagement. Whatever this box contained, Elena understood, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in her chest, that it was the reason everything had changed tonight. It was the reason Damien had looked at her with such distance in his eyes. It was the reason her mother now wore a crown that should have belonged to her daughter. And Elena intended to find out exactly what it was. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, with the box beside her, watching the moon climb higher over the pack grounds, listening to the last echoes of celebration fade into silence. Somewhere out there, Damien was probably standing beside her mother, accepting congratulations from pack elders who had no idea what strange arrangement had truly taken place that evening. Somewhere out there, the life Elena had always expected to live had quietly ended, replaced by a future she could not yet see. But sitting there in the darkness, holding a secret she had not yet dared to unwrap, Elena felt something shift inside her, something steadier and harder than the grief that had overwhelmed her only hours earlier. She would not simply accept what had happened tonight. She would not fade quietly into the background of her mother's new reign. Whatever truth was hidden inside that wooden box, whatever history connected her mother to the Alpha King in ways Elena had never suspected, she would uncover it, piece by piece, no matter how long it took, or how many secrets stood in her way. The moon watched silently as she finally broke the wax seal on the letter, her hand steady now, her fear replaced by something far more powerful: determination. She began to read. The letter was written in a hand Elena did not recognize. The ink faded to a soft brown with age. She unfolded it carefully, the old paper crackling under her fingers, and began to read by the thin light of the moon coming through her window. The words were addressed not to her mother, but to someone named Marianne, a name Elena had never heard spoken in her home. The letter spoke of a debt owed between two families, a promise made under desperate circumstances many years earlier, and a child who had been kept safe because of a bargain struck in secret. Elena read the lines twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of names and events that meant nothing to her, yet felt somehow tangled up in her own life. Near the bottom of the page, one line stood out, written with more urgency than the rest. The ink pressed so hard into the paper that it had nearly torn through. It read simply, "The daughter must never know the truth of her father, or everything we built will fall apart." Elena stared at the words until they blurred together. Her father. Edmund Voss, the man who had died when she was 6, the man whose memory her mother had guarded so fiercely all these years, refusing to speak of him, except in vague, gentle stories meant to comfort a grieving child. Elena had always accepted those stories without question. Now, holding this letter in trembling hands, she wondered for the first time whether any of it had been true. She turned the letter over, searching for more, but the back was blank. Whoever had written it had said just enough to raise 1,000 new questions, and answered none of the ones already burning in Elena's chest. She picked up the tarnished silver pendant from the box, and turned it over in her palm, studying the crescent moon shape, the fine craftsmanship that spoke of a family far wealthier than the one she had grown up believing was hers. A sound from the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving closer to her door. Elena quickly wrapped the letter and pendant back into their cloth, shoving the box under her pillow, just as a soft knock came against the wood. "Elena?" Her mother's voice, quiet and careful, drifted through the door. "Are you awake?" Elena's heart pounded so loudly, she was certain her mother could hear it even through the closed door. She considered staying silent, pretending to be asleep, but something in her refused to hide any longer. She had questions now, and she intended to ask them. "Come in," Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened, and Ravenna stepped inside, still wearing the elegant blue gown she had worn to accept her crown, though the silver circlet that now marked her as Luna had been removed. In the dim light, her mother looked older than Elena remembered, tired lines etched around her eyes that had not been there that morning. "I know you must hate me right now," Ravenna said softly, standing near the doorway as though unsure whether she was welcome any closer. "I know nothing I say tonight will make sense of what happened." "Then explain it to me," Elena said, sitting up straighter on the bed. "Explain why Damien rejected me in front of the entire pack. Explain why you accepted a crown that should have been mine. Explain why you looked relieved when he humiliated your own daughter." Ravenna flinched at the word relieved, and for a moment, Elena thought her mother might simply turn and leave the room without answering. Instead, Ravenna crossed the space between them and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "There are things about our family you don't know," Ravenna began, choosing each word with visible care. "Things I have kept from you your whole life, because I believed, foolishly perhaps, that protecting you meant keeping you in the dark." "What kind of things?" Elena pressed, though her hand instinctively moved to press against the pillow, feeling the shape of the hidden box beneath it. "Your father," Ravenna said, and her voice caught slightly on the word, "was not the man you believe him to be. Edmund loved you. That much was always true. But there were circumstances surrounding his death and surrounding the years before it that I chose to bury rather than burden you with." "What circumstances?" Elena's voice rose, despite her attempt to stay calm. "Mother, you let me walk into that hall tonight, believing I was about to become Luna. You let the entire pack watch me be rejected and replaced by you. I deserve more than vague hints about secrets you've kept for years." Ravenna's composure finally cracked, just slightly, the corner of her mouth trembling before she pressed her lips together and looked away toward the dark window. "Damien did not reject you because of any fault in you," she said quietly. "He rejected you because of a promise made long before you were born, a promise that involved your father, and involved me, and involved a debt that could only be settled in the way it was settled tonight." "What promise?" Elena demanded. "What debt?" "I cannot tell you everything tonight," Ravenna said, and there was something almost pleading in her tone now. "Not because I don't trust you, but because some truths, once spoken, cannot be taken back. I need time, Elena. I need to speak with Damien first, to understand exactly how much can safely be revealed." Elena felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp. Safely revealed to whom? To me? I am not a child anymore, Mother. I deserve to know why my entire future was decided by people who never bothered to ask what I wanted. Ravenna reached out, as if to take her daughter's hand, but Elena pulled back instinctively, and her mother's hand fell empty into the space between them. Something passed across Ravenna's face then, a flicker of hurt so genuine that Elena almost regretted the small cruelty of the gesture. Almost. I know I have failed you tonight, Ravenna said softly. I know that no explanation I offer will undo the pain of what happened in that hall. But please believe me when I say that everything I have done, every choice I have made, has been to protect you, even when it looked like the opposite. It doesn't feel like protection, Elena said, her voice breaking despite her effort to stay strong. It feels like betrayal. Ravenna said nothing for a long moment, her eyes glistening in the dim light. Finally, she rose from the bed, smoothing the front of her gown, with hands that were not quite steady. Rest tonight, if you can, she said. Tomorrow, I promise, we will talk more. I will tell you what I can. She left the room quietly, closing the door behind her with a soft click that felt, to Elena, like the closing of far more than a wooden door. Elena sat alone in the darkness for a long while, the hidden box still tucked beneath her pillow, the letter's unfinished warning echoing in her mind. The daughter must never know the truth of her father, or everything we built will fall apart. She thought about her father then, really thought about him, for the first time in years. She remembered fragments, mostly feelings rather than clear memories, since she had been so young when he died. The warmth of his laugh. The way he used to lift her onto his shoulders during pack gatherings so she could see over the crowd. The strange quietness that had settled over her mother in the months after his death. A grief that seemed to carry more than simple sorrow. Had that grief carried guilt as well? Had it carried fear? Elena did not sleep. Instead, she sat with the letter spread open on her lap, reading the faded words again and again, searching for meaning in every sentence, every unfinished thought. She thought about the pendant, the fine silver craftsmanship that did not match the modest life her family had always lived. She thought about the name Marianne, unfamiliar and strange, and wondered who this woman was, and what role she had played in whatever bargain had shaped Elena's entire life without her knowledge. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Elena made a quiet decision. She would not wait for her mother to decide what truths were safe to share. She would not sit passively, while Damien and Ravenna determined her future between themselves once again. Whatever secret bound her father's death, her mother's crown, and Damien's public rejection together, Elena intended to find it herself, no matter what it cost her. She rose from the bed as the sun finally broke over the tree line, wrapped the letter and pendant carefully back into the wooden box, and hid it deep within her travel bag, beneath layers of clothing, where no one would think to search. Whatever came next, whatever confrontations or revelations waited for her in the coming days, Elena intended to face them with her eyes fully open. The house around her had grown quiet again, her mother presumably asleep after their difficult conversation, but Elena knew that quiet would not last. Word of last night's ceremony would already be spreading through every corner of Pack territory, carried by whispers and rumors that would only grow stranger and more exaggerated with each retelling. She would need to move carefully now, gathering information without drawing suspicion, piecing together a truth that two powerful people seemed determined to keep buried. Outside her window, the Pack grounds stirred to life with the ordinary business of morning. Servants carrying water, hunters preparing for the day's work, children laughing somewhere near the training fields, all of them unaware of the storm quietly building beneath the surface of their world. Elena watched them for a moment, feeling strangely distant from the life she had always known, as though the events of the previous night had already begun pulling her away from everything familiar. She was still the same person she had been yesterday morning, before the humiliation, before the letter, before the crown, that should have been hers, settled instead on her mother's head. But something inside her had shifted, hardened, sharpened into a resolve she had never needed before. She would find the truth. She would understand exactly why Damien had chosen to destroy her future in front of the entire Pack, and exactly what role her mother had played in a secret that reached back further than Elena's own memory could stretch. Whatever it cost her, she would find out everything. 3 days passed before Elena found the courage to leave the small stone house, and walk openly through packed territory again. In that time, she had barely eaten, barely slept, spending long hours instead, poring over the letter and searching her own memories for clues she might have overlooked as a child. The pendant she kept close, tucked into a small pouch she wore beneath her clothing, its cold silver weight a constant reminder of the mystery she was determined to solve. Grace visited each day, bringing food and news from the pack, though the news mostly consisted of gossip Elena already understood too well. The whole territory was still buzzing with talk of the ceremony, of the shocking rejection, of Ravenna's sudden rise to the title of Luna. Some pack members whispered that Elena must have done something terrible to earn such public disgrace. Others whispered that Ravenna had somehow manipulated the entire situation for her own gain. No one, it seemed, knew the real truth, and Elena intended to keep it that way until she understood it herself. On the fourth morning, she finally dressed in simple traveling clothes, tied her hair back, and left the house before her mother woke. She had decided, after days of restless thinking, that the answers she needed would not come from waiting patiently for her mother's careful explanations. She needed to speak with the one person who had orchestrated this entire humiliation in the first place. She needed to speak with Damien. Finding him alone proved more difficult than she expected. As Alpha King, Damien's days were filled with meetings, patrols, and the endless responsibilities of governing pack territory, and his new status, as newly bonded to Ravenna, meant guards now surrounded him more carefully than before. Elena spent the better part of the morning watching from a distance, learning his patterns, before she finally spotted an opportunity. Every afternoon, Damien walked alone to the training grounds at the edge of the forest, a habit Elena remembered from years earlier, when he used to spar with the younger pack members to keep his skills sharp. She positioned herself near the tree line, waiting, her heart pounding, with a mixture of nerves and determination. When he finally appeared, walking with the easy confidence that had always marked him as Alpha, Elena stepped out from the shadows of the trees, blocking his path before he reached the open field. Damien stopped abruptly, surprise flickering across his features before his expression settled into something more guarded. "Elena," he said, his voice careful, "this isn't a good time." "It's never going to be a good time for you," Elena replied, standing her ground, despite the way her knees trembled beneath her simple traveling dress. "You owe me an explanation, Damien. You owed me one 3 nights ago, in front of the entire pack, and you owe me one now." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Elena thought he might simply walk past her, refusing to engage. But something in her expression, some mixture of grief and fury that she could no longer hide, seemed to give him pause. "What happened that night was not about you failing to meet expectations," Damien said finally, his voice lower now, more careful. "It had nothing to do with your worth, Elena. I need you to understand that." "Then explain it to me," Elena demanded. "Because from where I stood, it looked exactly like rejection. It looked like you decided, in front of 1,000 witnesses, that I wasn't good enough to stand beside you. And then you turned around and named my own mother as your Luna instead. Tell me how that isn't about my worth." Damien's eyes flickered with something that might have been guilt, though it vanished quickly behind his composed exterior. "There are agreements between our families that predate both of us," he said. "Agreements I am bound to honor, whether I understand all the reasons behind them or not." "What agreements?" Elena pressed. "My mother said the same thing. Vague words about promises and debts, but no one will tell me what any of it actually means." "It isn't my place to explain everything," Damien said, and Elena could hear genuine frustration in his voice now, though she couldn't tell if it was directed at her or at the situation itself. "Your mother should be the one to tell you the full truth, when she is ready." "She's had 3 days," Elena said sharply. "She hasn't told me anything more than she did the night of the ceremony. So forgive me if I don't have much patience left for people telling me to wait." Damien studied her for a long moment, and Elena thought she saw something shift in his expression, a softening that reminded her briefly of the boy who had pulled her out of the river all those years ago. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "If there had been any other way to honor the agreement without humiliating you in front of the pack, I would have taken it. But the terms were specific. It had to happen publicly, on that exact night, in that exact way." "Whose terms?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Who could possibly demand something so cruel?" Damien hesitated, glancing around as though checking for anyone who might overhear them, even though the training grounds remained empty in the afternoon quiet. "There is a name," he said slowly, "that connects everything. A name I am not permitted to speak until your mother has told you the rest herself. But I will tell you this much, Elena. The choice was never about punishing you. It was about protecting something far older and far more dangerous than either of us fully understands." "Protecting what?" Elena asked, frustration bleeding into her voice. "Protecting whom?" "I've already said more than I should," Damien said, and something in his tone told Elena that no amount of pressing would pull further answers from him today. "Talk to your mother. Push her harder than you have. She holds the rest of this truth, not me." He moved to step past her then, and Elena, driven by a desperation she barely understood herself, reached out and caught his arm. "Wait," she said. "The letter I found, the one addressed to someone named Marianne. Do you know who that is?" Something shifted dramatically in Damien's expression at the mention of that name, his eyes widening slightly, before he schooled his features back into careful neutrality. But it was too late. Elena had seen it, the flash of recognition, the brief flicker of something that looked almost like fear. "Where did you find that letter?" he asked, his voice tight now, urgent, in a way it hadn't been moments before. "Among my mother's things," Elena said, watching him carefully. "You know the name. Tell me who she is." "I can't," Damien said, pulling his arm gently from her grip. "Elena, listen to me carefully. Whatever you found, you need to keep it hidden, and you need to keep it safe. Do not show it to anyone else. Do not mention it to your mother, not yet. Do you understand?" "Why not?" Elena asked, confusion and alarm mixing together in her chest. "If she wrote it, or received it, surely she already knows what it says." "Just trust me on this," Damien said, and there was something in his voice now that sounded almost like genuine concern for her safety, a tone that unsettled Elena more than anything else he had said. "Please, keep it hidden until I can figure out the safest way to help you understand all of this." Before Elena could press further, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. A pack guard appeared at the edge of the training field, calling out that Damien was needed back at the main hall for an urgent matter. Damien glanced at Elena one final time, something unreadable passing across his face, before he turned and followed the guard away, leaving her standing alone at the edge of the forest, with more questions than she had arrived with. Elena stood there for a long while after he had gone, replaying the conversation in her mind, trying to piece together meaning from his careful, incomplete answers. He knew the name Marianne. He had reacted to it with something close to fear, and he had warned her, urgently, to keep the letter hidden not from strangers, but specifically from her own mother. What kind of secret required protecting from the very woman who had likely written the words herself? She walked back toward the small stone house in a daze, her mind spinning with possibilities, none of which made sense on their own. By the time she reached home, the afternoon sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the packed grounds. She found her mother in the small kitchen, preparing a simple meal, the domestic scene almost jarring against everything Elena now knew was hidden beneath the surface of their lives. "Where have you been?" Ravenna asked, glancing up from the counter, concern evident in her tired eyes. "Walking," Elena said carefully, unwilling to reveal her conversation with Damien just yet. "Thinking." Ravenna studied her daughter for a long moment, something cautious in her expression, as though she sensed there was more to the answer than Elena was offering. "I know you're angry with me," she said finally. "I know you have every right to be. But I need you to know that I am trying to find the right way to tell you everything. Elena, it isn't as simple as you might think." "Nothing about this has been simple," Elena replied, sitting down heavily at the small wooden table. "Mother, please. Just tell me the truth. All of it. I can handle it, whatever it is." Ravenna set down the knife she had been using to prepare vegetables and turned to face her daughter fully, wiping her hands on her apron. For a moment, Elena thought her mother might finally relent, might finally open up the years of secrets she had carried alone. But instead, a strange, distant look crossed Ravenna's face, and she glanced toward the window, toward the darkening sky outside. "Not tonight," she said quietly. "There is someone I need to speak with first, someone who has been waiting a very long time for this conversation to finally happen. After that, Elena, I promise you, I will tell you everything." "Who?" Elena asked, though some instinct told her she already suspected the answer. Ravenna did not answer directly. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her apron and withdrew a small folded note, her hands trembling slightly as she held it out toward her daughter. "This arrived for you this afternoon, while you were out walking," she said. "I don't know who sent it." Elena took the note with confusion, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, but slightly aged, similar in style to the letter she had found hidden in her mother's room. The message was short, only a few lines, but it sent a chill through Elena's entire body as she read it. "I know what you found. I know what it means. Meet me at the old stone bridge beyond the eastern woods, tomorrow at dusk, and I will tell you everything your mother refuses to say." There was no signature, no name to identify the sender, only a small symbol drawn at the bottom of the page, a crescent moon, identical to the one carved into the tarnished silver pendant hidden in Elena's travel bag. Elena looked up at her mother, who was watching her with an expression of genuine confusion, apparently unaware of the note's contents. Whoever had sent this message clearly knew about the letter Elena had found, knew about the pendant, knew secrets that connected directly to whatever bargain had shaped her entire life without her knowledge. For the first time since the humiliating ceremony 3 nights earlier, Elena felt something other than grief or anger settle into her chest. She felt the sharp, electric pull of possibility, the sense that somewhere beyond the safety of everything familiar, the truth was finally waiting to be found. Tomorrow at dusk, she would go to the old stone bridge, whatever the risk, whatever the cost. She was done waiting for other people to decide when she deserved to know the truth about her own life. That night, Elena barely slept at all, her mind spinning with plans for the following evening. She told no one about the note, not even Grace, though her friend visited briefly in the morning, and immediately noticed the tension in Elena's expression. "You're hiding something," Grace said, studying her carefully as they sat together in the small garden behind the stone house. "You've had that look on your face since yesterday afternoon." "I'm fine," Elena said, though the lie felt hollow even to her own ears. "Just tired. Everything that's happened, it's a lot to carry." Grace did not press further, though the doubt remained clear in her eyes. They spent the morning in quiet conversation about lighter things, the upcoming harvest festival, a new litter of pups born to one of the pack families, anything that felt normal and safe compared to the storm building beneath the surface of Elena's thoughts. But as the afternoon wore on and the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, Elena found herself growing increasingly restless, counting down the hours until dusk. She waited until her mother left for a meeting with the pack elders, a regular occurrence now that Ravenna carried the responsibilities of Luna, before slipping out of the house herself. She changed into practical clothing, sturdy boots, and a dark cloak that would help her move unnoticed through the woods, and tucked the small wooden box containing the letter and pendant into a satchel she wore across her body. She did not know what the mysterious sender wanted with these items, but some instinct told her it would be wiser to keep them close, rather than leave them hidden and vulnerable at home. The eastern woods stretched beyond the edge of pack territory, a stretch of forest that Elena had explored occasionally as a child, but rarely visited as an adult. The old stone bridge lay nearly an hour's walk from the main pack grounds, built long ago by settlers whose names had been lost to history, spanning a narrow river that marked the boundary between cross territory and the neutral lands beyond. As Elena walked, the forest grew quieter around her, the usual sounds of birds and small creatures fading into an unsettling stillness. She kept her senses alert, listening for any sign of danger, though she told herself repeatedly that whoever had sent the note likely meant her no harm. If they had wanted to hurt her, surely they would have chosen a less obvious approach than an anonymous invitation. Still, her heart pounded steadily faster as the trees began to thin, and the old stone bridge finally came into view ahead of her, its weathered gray stones illuminated by the last golden light of the setting sun. The bridge arched gracefully over the narrow river, moss growing thick along its edges, and for a moment, Elena thought the meeting place was empty, that perhaps the sender had changed their mind, or never intended to appear at all. Then a figure stepped out from beneath the shadow of the bridge, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. The woman was older, perhaps 60 years of age, with silver hair pulled back into a simple braid, and sharp, intelligent eyes that studied Elena with an intensity that made her feel suddenly exposed. She wore plain traveling clothes, nothing that marked her as belonging to any particular pack, and there was something in her bearing, a quiet dignity mixed with deep weariness, that reminded Elena strangely of her own mother. "You came," the woman said, her voice carrying easily across the quiet clearing. "I wasn't certain you would." "Who are you?" Elena asked, staying near the tree line, ready to retreat if necessary. "How do you know about the letter?" The woman smiled faintly, though there was little joy in the expression. "My name is Marianne," she said. "I believe you found a letter addressed to me, hidden among your mother's belongings." Elena's mind raced, trying to process the revelation. This was the woman from the letter, the person whose identity had made Damien react with such alarm the previous day. "You wrote that letter," Elena said slowly, "or received it. I don't understand which." "I received it," Marianne confirmed, moving closer, though she stopped a respectful distance away, apparently sensing Elena's caution. "Your mother wrote it to me, many years ago, shortly before your father died." The mention of her father sent a jolt through Elena's chest. "What do you know about my father's death?" she asked, her voice tighter than she intended. Marianne's expression grew somber, and she gestured toward a fallen log near the edge of the river, inviting Elena to sit. Elena hesitated, still wary, but the desperate need for answers finally overpowered her caution, and she moved closer, settling onto the log, while keeping careful distance between herself and the stranger. "Your father, Edmund Voss," Marianne began, choosing her words carefully, "was not simply a member of a mid-ranking pack family, as you have always been led to believe. He was born into a bloodline that once held significant power in these territories, a bloodline that was systematically stripped of its influence generations before your birth, following a conflict that nearly destroyed the balance between several packs." "What kind of conflict?" Elena asked, leaning forward despite herself. "A war of succession," Marianne said, "fought between rival families who each believed they held the rightful claim to lead this territory. Your father's family lost that war, though not through weakness. They lost because they were betrayed by an ally they trusted completely." Elena felt a chill settle over her, unrelated to the cooling evening air. Betrayed by whom? Marianne's eyes flickered toward the direction of the pack grounds, back toward cross territory, and Elena understood the implication, before the words were even spoken. "The Cross family," Marianne said quietly. "Damien's grandfather orchestrated the downfall of your father's bloodline, ensuring that the Cross family alone would hold power over this territory for generations to come." "That doesn't make sense," Elena said, shaking her head. "If Damien's family destroyed my father's bloodline, why would Damien's grandfather, or Damien himself, have anything to do with an agreement involving my mother?" "Because guilt has a long memory," Marianne said. "When your father survived the purge of his family, quietly hidden and protected by allies who disagreed with what had been done, a debt was created. Your father grew up in secret, protected by a network of families who believed the Cross line had committed an injustice that needed correcting. Eventually, as a young man, he met your mother, who came from one of those very families that had helped shelter him." Elena absorbed this information slowly, feeling as though the foundations of everything she understood about her own life were shifting beneath her. "So my mother knew all along who my father really was." "She knew," Marianne confirmed, "and so did the current Alpha King's family, though it took years for that truth to fully surface. When Edmund died, an agreement was struck, quietly, between your mother and the Cross family, an agreement meant to protect you specifically." "Protect me from what?" Elena asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. Marianne's expression grew grave. From being recognized as the last surviving heir of a bloodline, the Cross family worked very hard to erase, she said. "If your true heritage became widely known, Elena, there are those within these territories who would see you either as a threat to be eliminated, or as a symbol around which old rebellions could rally once more. Your mother chose to keep you hidden in plain sight, raising you as an ordinary pack daughter, believing that obscurity was the safest path forward." Elena's mind reeled, trying to reconcile this staggering revelation with the ordinary life she had always known. The quiet childhood, the modest home, the mother who had never once hinted at any of this. "But if she wanted to keep me hidden," Elena said slowly, working through the logic, even as she spoke it aloud. Why would Damien ever consider bonding with me as Luna in the first place? Wouldn't that draw exactly the kind of attention my mother wanted to avoid? That, Marianne said, is the question that has troubled me as well, ever since I learned of the arranged betrothal years ago. I believe the original agreement between your mother and the Cross family included a provision that the betrothal would eventually be broken, publicly and decisively, at a specific and predetermined moment, precisely to prevent anyone from suspecting your true heritage. A public rejection makes you seem insignificant, unworthy of notice. It buries your identity even more effectively than quiet obscurity ever could. Elena sat in stunned silence, the pieces of the terrible puzzle finally clicking into place. Her humiliation in that great hall had not been a genuine rejection at all. It had been a calculated performance, designed to protect a secret so dangerous that her own mother had been willing to sacrifice her daughter's dignity and heart to preserve it. And my mother, becoming Luna, Elena said slowly. That was part of the agreement too, wasn't it? A reward, or a way to keep her close enough to continue protecting me from within the pack's own leadership. Marianne nodded slowly. I believe so, though I cannot say for certain what specific terms were negotiated between your mother and Damien. I have only ever known fragments of this story myself, gathered over many years of quiet correspondence with your mother, who trusted me as one of the few people who understood the full truth of your father's bloodline. Elena looked down at the satchel resting against her hip, thinking of the letter and pendant hidden within it. The pendant, she said, the crescent moon symbol. What does it mean? It was your father's family crest, Marianne said softly, passed down through generations, before the purge stripped his bloodline of any formal recognition. Your mother kept it hidden all these years, likely intending to give it to you someday, when she believed it was finally safe to do so. The weight of everything Elena had learned settled over her like a heavy fog, thick and disorienting. Her entire identity, everything she had believed about her family, her father's death, her mother's choices, had been built on a foundation of secrets designed to keep her safe from dangers she had never known existed. And Damien, the man who had humiliated her so publicly, had not acted out of cruelty or judgment about her worth. He had acted, apparently, to protect a secret that ran far deeper than either of them had fully understood at the time. Why are you telling me this now? Elena asked finally, looking up at Marianne, with a mixture of gratitude and lingering suspicion. If this secret has been protected so carefully for so many years, why reveal it to me at all? Marianne's expression grew troubled, and she glanced once more toward the darkening woods around them, as though checking for unseen eyes. Because I believe the danger your mother has spent your whole life trying to avoid is no longer avoidable, she said quietly. There are movements stirring in the southern territories, old alliances reforming, whispers of rebellion against the Cross leadership. Your existence, Elena, whether you wish it or not, has become relevant again. I believe you deserve to understand the truth before others come seeking you who may not have your best interests at heart. A cold wind swept through the clearing then, rustling the leaves overhead, and Elena felt a shiver run down her spine that had little to do with the temperature. The quiet, ordinary life she had always known suddenly felt impossibly fragile, poised on the edge of something far larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. What do I do now? She asked, her voice small in the vast darkening forest. Marianne reached into her own cloak and withdrew a small folded map, worn soft with age, handing it carefully to Elena. There is a place, beyond the reach of both the Cross territory and the Southern Rebellion, where you might find safety and answers, should you ever need to disappear quickly, she said. I cannot tell you everything tonight, Elena, but I believe, very soon, you will need to make a choice about the life you wish to live, and the truth you wish to claim as your own. Elena took the map with trembling hands, tucking it carefully alongside the letter and pendant in her satchel. As the last light of dusk faded from the sky above the old stone bridge, she understood, with sudden and absolute clarity, that the humiliating night in the great hall had marked not an ending, but only the very beginning of a much larger story, one that would demand every ounce of courage she possessed to survive. Elena did not return home immediately after leaving the old stone bridge. Instead, she walked for a long while along the edge of the river, her thoughts churning too violently to face her mother so soon after learning the truth Marianne had shared. The moon had risen fully by the time she finally made her way back toward Pack territory, its pale light guiding her through the darkened woods. When she reached the small stone house, she found her mother waiting up, seated near the window with a single candle burning low beside her. Ravenna's face was pale with worry, and she rose quickly from her chair the moment Elena stepped through the door. "Where have you been?" Ravenna demanded, though relief mixed clearly with the sharpness in her voice. "I searched everywhere for you." Grace didn't know where you'd gone. No one had seen you since this morning. Elena stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying her mother's face, searching for any trace of the woman who had kept such an enormous secret hidden for her entire life. "I met with Marianne," she said finally, watching closely for her mother's reaction. The color drained instantly from Ravenna's face, her hand rising to press against her chest, as though the name itself had struck her like a physical blow. "Marianne," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "She found you? How?" "She sent a note," Elena said, stepping further into the house and closing the door behind her. "She told me everything, Mother, about my father's true bloodline, about the purge his family suffered at the hands of the Cross family, about the agreement you made to protect me, and about why Damien rejected me so publicly." Ravenna sank back into her chair, her composure finally crumbling entirely. Tears filled her eyes, and for a long moment, she said nothing at all, simply staring at her daughter with an expression that mixed grief, guilt, and something that looked almost like relief, that the burden of secrecy had finally been lifted from her alone. "I wanted to tell you myself," Ravenna said eventually, her voice thick with emotion. "I had planned to, Elena, truly. I only needed time to find the right words, to prepare you properly for the danger that comes with knowing such a truth." "You had years," Elena said, though her anger had softened somewhat since her conversation with Marianne, tempered now by a deeper understanding of the impossible position her mother had faced. "You could have told me at any point growing up, and risk you letting something slip, even accidentally, to the wrong person?" Ravenna asked, though her tone held no real accusation, only exhausted honesty. "Children do not always understand the weight of secrets, Elena. I made the choice to protect you through ignorance, believing that what you didn't know couldn't be used against you. Perhaps that was wrong. I have asked myself that question every single day since your father died." Elena moved closer, finally sitting down across from her mother at the small table, the candle flickering gently between them. "Tell me about him," she said softly. "Tell me about my father. Not the sanitized version you gave me as a child, but the truth." Ravenna wiped at her eyes and took a steadying breath before beginning. "Edmund was the last surviving member of the Ashford bloodline," she said. "A family that once held significant influence in these territories, generations before either of us was born. When the Cross family orchestrated their downfall, most of the Ashford line was killed or scattered, their name erased from official pack records entirely. Your father was only an infant when it happened, smuggled away by loyal allies who could not bear to see an innocent child destroyed along with his family's legacy." "How did you meet him?" Elena asked. "My own family was one of those who helped shelter displaced Ashford allies over the years," Ravenna explained. "I met Edmund when we were both young, barely more than children ourselves. We fell in love slowly, over many years, long before either of us fully understood the danger his true identity carried. By the time we married, I knew everything about his past, and I chose to build a life with him regardless." "And his death?" Elena asked, dreading the answer, even as she needed to hear it. "Was that connected to his bloodline as well?" Ravenna's expression grew shadowed with old grief. There were those who never stopped searching for surviving Ashford descendants, even decades after the purge, she said quietly. "Whether your father's death was truly an accident, as I was told at the time, or something more deliberate, I have never been entirely certain. I chose, for your safety, to accept the official explanation and move forward, rather than risk drawing further attention by questioning it too loudly." The revelation settled heavily over Elena, the possibility that her father's death might not have been the simple tragedy she had always believed, but something far darker, connected to secrets that had shaped her entire existence without her knowledge. "And the agreement with the Cross family," she said, steering the conversation toward the piece of the puzzle she still did not fully understand. "How did that come to be?" "After Edmund died," Ravenna said, "the current Alpha King's father approached me privately. He knew about your father's true identity, had known for years, and he offered a proposal meant to protect you, while also settling an old debt of guilt his own family carried for their role in the Ashford Purge. You would be raised as an ordinary pack daughter, given every advantage of education and status, and eventually, when you came of age, you would be betrothed to the future alpha, Damien, as a way of symbolically restoring some measure of what had been taken from your father's line, without ever revealing the truth publicly. But the betrothal was never meant to actually happen, Elena said slowly, remembering what Marianne had told her at the bridge. It was designed to fail, publicly, so that no one would suspect I mattered enough to be worth protecting. Ravenna nodded, fresh tears slipping down her cheeks. That was always the final piece of the arrangement, she confirmed. A public rejection, dramatic enough to convince the entire pack, and anyone watching from beyond our territory, that you held no true significance. It was meant to bury the truth so completely that no one would ever think to look beneath the surface. And you accepting the crown, Elena said, was that part of the plan as well? It was, Ravenna admitted. Damien's father, before he passed leadership to his son, insisted that I be given some form of protection and status once the betrothal ended, since my own position within the pack would become vulnerable without a formal connection to a family of standing. Damien, I believe, agreed to honor that final piece of his father's arrangement, even though it meant humiliating you far more publicly than either of us wanted. Elena sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing everything her mother had finally revealed, feeling the last pieces of the puzzle settle uneasily into place. The humiliation in the great hall, the strange relief on her mother's face, the crown that should have belonged to her, all of it now made a terrible kind of sense, born not from cruelty, but from years of careful, desperate protection. Marianne said something troubling, Elena said finally. She mentioned movements stirring in the southern territories, old alliances reforming, rebellion against the Cross leadership. She said my existence has become relevant again, whether I wish it or not. Ravenna's face paled further at this news, genuine alarm flickering behind her tired eyes. I had hoped we had more time, she whispered, almost to herself. I had hoped the secret would remain buried, at least until you were older, more prepared to face whatever consequences might come with the truth becoming known. What consequences? Elena pressed. Marianne wasn't specific. She only warned me that others might come seeking me, people who may not have my best interests at heart. If word spreads that an Ashford descendant still survives, Ravenna said slowly, choosing her words with visible care, there are factions within the southern territories who would seek to use you as a symbol, a rallying point for rebellion against Cross leadership, regardless of whether you wish to be involved in such a conflict. There are also those loyal to the current power structure who might see you as a lingering threat that needs to be permanently silenced, to prevent any possibility of rebellion gaining momentum around your bloodline. The weight of these possibilities settled over Elena like a physical burden, the realization that her simple existence now placed her at the center of a conflict far larger than her own personal grief over a broken engagement. So what do I do? She asked, echoing the same desperate question she had asked Marianne at the stone bridge only hours earlier. Ravenna reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, and this time, Elena did not pull away. I don't know yet, her mother admitted honestly, but I promise you, Elena, whatever happens next, I will not let you face this alone. We will find a way through this together, even if it means finally stepping fully into the truth we have hidden for so long. They sat together in the quiet house for a long while after that, the candle slowly burning lower between them, neither speaking further, simply absorbing the weight of everything that had finally been revealed. Elena thought about her father, a man she barely remembered, whose true legacy had been stolen from him before she was even old enough to understand what that legacy meant. She thought about Damien, who had carried the guilt of his own family's betrayal, forced to enact a painful charade to protect a secret he had inherited rather than created. And she thought about herself, about the girl who had walked into that great hall 3 nights earlier, believing her future would be decided by a simple bonding ceremony, only to discover that her entire life had been shaped by forces far older and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The following days passed in a strange, tense quiet. Elena continued her ordinary routines within the pack, careful not to draw suspicion, while privately, she and her mother began cautiously discussing what steps might need to be taken to ensure her safety. Ravenna reached out quietly to trusted allies within the pack, old friends of Edmund's who had helped shelter him decades earlier, seeking guidance on how best to protect Elena now that her identity risked becoming known. Damien, for his part, kept a careful distance, though Elena occasionally caught him watching her from afar during pack gatherings, his expression unreadable, but no longer carrying the cold detachment he had displayed the night of the ceremony. She wondered, sometimes, what it must have cost him to carry out his father's plan, to publicly humiliate a woman he had known since childhood, all in service of a secret he had not chosen to inherit. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after her meeting with Marianne, Elena received another note, delivered quietly by a young pack messenger who claimed not to know its sender. She unfolded it with growing dread, remembering the last such note that had led her to the truth about her father's bloodline. This message was shorter, more urgent, the handwriting hurried and less carefully composed than before. It read simply, "They know. Leave before dawn, or it will be too late." Elena's blood ran cold as she read the words, understanding immediately that whatever fragile safety she had believed herself to have was now shattered entirely. Whoever had sent this warning believed the danger Marianne had spoken of was no longer a distant possibility, but an immediate, pressing threat. She found her mother in the kitchen and showed her the note without a word. Ravenna read it quickly, her face draining of all color, and when she looked up at her daughter, Elena saw genuine fear in her mother's eyes for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun. "We need to move quickly," Ravenna said, her voice tight with urgency. "Pack only what you truly need, Elena. Tonight, we prepare for you to leave this territory, before whoever sent this warning turns out to be right." Elena's hands trembled as she moved through her small room, pulling only the most essential items into a worn leather bag. Clothing that would not draw attention, a small amount of coin her mother had quietly saved over the years, and, tucked carefully at the bottom beneath everything else, the wooden box containing the letter and the crescent moon pendant that had started this entire unraveling. She paused for a moment, holding the map Marianne had given her at the stone bridge, studying the careful lines that marked a path toward safety somewhere beyond the reach of both Cross Territory and the Southern Rebellion. Her mother appeared in the doorway, her own face tight with barely controlled panic, though she moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had perhaps imagined this exact moment many times over the years, preparing silently for a danger she had always feared might eventually arrive. "We don't have much time," Ravenna said, glancing anxiously toward the window, where the first hints of pre-dawn gray had begun to soften the darkness outside. "I've sent word to Damien. He needs to know what's happening before anyone else in the pack becomes aware." "Why does he need to know?" Elena asked, cinching the strap of her bag tightly. "If people are coming for me, wouldn't it be safer to simply disappear quietly, without drawing attention from anyone, including him?" "Because Damien commands guards who can help protect the borders while you slip away unnoticed," Ravenna said, "and because, whatever has happened between the two of you, he has proven himself committed to keeping this secret safe. We need every advantage we can gather right now, Elena. This isn't the moment for pride." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she could manage this crisis on her own terms, without relying on the man who had humiliated her so publicly only weeks earlier. But the fear in her mother's eyes convinced her to set aside her wounded pride for now, at least until they understood the true scope of the danger closing in around them. They made their way quietly through the pack grounds, avoiding the main paths where guards typically patrolled, moving instead through the shadows between houses, until they reached the edge of the training fields near the forest. Damien was already waiting there, dressed in simple dark clothing, rather than his usual formal attire, his expression tense and alert as he watched them approach. "How bad is it?" Ravenna asked without preamble, her voice hushed even in the empty field. "Worse than we feared," Damien said grimly. "I received word an hour ago from scouts along the southern border. A group has crossed into our territory under cover of darkness, moving quickly, asking questions in nearby villages about a young woman matching Elena's description. They are not being subtle about their intentions." Elena's chest tightened with fear, the reality of the danger finally settling over her with full weight. This was no longer an abstract possibility discussed in hushed tones at a hidden meeting place. This was happening now, tonight, and the safety of her entire life depended on the choices made in the next few hours. "Who are they?" Elena asked, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the fear coursing through her. "We believe they're aligned with the rebellion factions in the south," Damien said. Whether they intend to use you as a symbol for their cause, or eliminate you to prevent cross-leadership from claiming any legitimacy through association with the Ashford bloodline, I cannot say for certain, but either possibility puts you in grave danger. Then we move now, Ravenna said firmly. Damien, can you provide an escort to the border, someone we can trust absolutely? Damien nodded, though his expression carried a heaviness that suggested he was working through calculations far more complicated than simple logistics. I can arrange an escort, he said. But Elena, I need you to understand something first. Leaving tonight means leaving everything behind, possibly for a very long time. There is no guarantee of when, or if, it will ever be safe for you to return to this territory. Elena absorbed this reality slowly, feeling the finality of the choice pressing down on her. Everything she had ever known, her home, her friend Grace, the only life she had ever lived, all of it would be left behind in the coming hours, replaced by an uncertain future in unfamiliar territory, hiding from dangers she barely understood. I understand, she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. But staying here, waiting for them to find me, isn't an option either. Not if it puts everyone I care about at risk as well. Something shifted in Damien's expression then, a flicker of genuine respect mixed with regret. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I am sorry for how all of this unfolded. The night of the ceremony, the humiliation you endured, none of it was ever meant to bring you to a moment like this one. We can discuss regrets another time, Elena said, though her tone held less anger than it might have weeks earlier. Right now, I need to know how we're getting out of here safely. Damien nodded, seeming to appreciate her practical focus despite the emotional weight of the moment. There's a route through the eastern woods, past the old stone bridge, that leads toward neutral territory beyond our borders, he said. It's the same general direction Marianne likely traveled when she met you there. I can provide 2 guards I trust completely to escort you safely across the border before dawn breaks fully. And after that, Elena asked, where do I go once I've crossed into neutral territory? Ravenna stepped forward then, pulling something from beneath her cloak, a small folded piece of paper that she pressed carefully into her daughter's hands. There is a village, several days' journey beyond the border, where old allies of your father's family still live quietly, protected by their own careful secrecy, she said. I have written the details here, along with a name you can use to identify yourself safely to them. They will help you establish a new life, Elena, until it becomes safe to return, or until we find another path forward. Elena took the paper with trembling hands, understanding fully now the depth of preparation her mother must have secretly maintained over the years, always half expecting a moment exactly like this one to eventually arrive. You knew this day might come, she said softly. You've been ready for this for a long time, haven't you? I hoped it never would, Ravenna said, tears glistening in her eyes despite her outward composure. But yes, I have always kept a plan ready, just in case. I could never forgive myself if I failed to protect you when the moment finally arrived. The sound of distant voices, faint but unmistakably drawing closer, sent a fresh wave of urgency through the small group gathered at the edge of the training fields. Damien's expression hardened instantly, his attention snapping toward the direction of the sound. We need to move now, he said firmly. The guards are waiting near the eastern tree line. Elena, you need to go immediately. Elena turned to her mother, unexpected grief rising suddenly in her chest at the thought of the separation ahead of them. Despite everything, despite the secrets and the pain of recent weeks, Ravenna was still her mother, the only parent she had ever truly known, and the thought of leaving her behind, possibly for years, felt suddenly unbearable. Come with me, Elena said impulsively, gripping her mother's hands tightly. And please, I can't do this alone. Ravenna's expression crumbled with visible anguish, but she shook her head slowly. I cannot leave, Elena. My position as Luna is the only thing keeping suspicion away from this pack, the only thing that might buy you additional time before anyone connects the threads fully. If I disappear alongside you, it will only confirm every suspicion those searching for you might already hold. Then when will I see you again? Elena asked, her voice breaking despite her effort to remain strong in this critical moment. I don't know, Ravenna admitted honestly, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. But I promise you, Elena, this is not goodbye forever. We will find each other again, when it's safe. I love you more than any secret I have ever kept. more than any crown or title I could ever hold. Please believe that. Whatever happens next. Elena held on to her mother for a long moment, memorizing the warmth of the embrace, the familiar scent of home, that she might not encounter again for a very long time. Finally, she pulled back, wiping quickly at her tears, forcing herself to focus on the urgent reality of the escape ahead of her. Damien led her quickly toward the eastern tree line, where two guards waited exactly as promised, their expressions grim but determined, as they prepared to escort her safely toward the border. Before Elena disappeared fully into the shadows of the forest, she turned back one final time, catching a last glimpse of Damien, standing beside her mother in the pre-dawn light, both of them watching her departure with expressions heavy with worry and regret. "Elena," Damien called softly, just before she vanished into the trees. She paused, turning back toward him one last time. "Whatever you discover out there, whatever truth you eventually uncover about your father's legacy, know that I never stopped believing you deserved far better than what happened that night in the Great Hall." Elena held his gaze for a long moment, feeling something complicated and unresolved pass between them. Gratitude mixed uneasily with lingering hurt. She did not respond, unable to find the right words in the urgency of the moment, and instead simply nodded once before turning and following the guards deeper into the darkness of the forest. Behind her, the pack grounds grew quieter, the voices that had been drawing closer moments earlier fading temporarily into the distance. But Elena knew, with grim certainty, that this quiet would not last long. Somewhere in the shadows behind her, danger was still closing in, and her only hope now lay in reaching the safety of the border before it caught up with her entirely. She walked quickly through the darkened woods, her heart heavy with the weight of everything she was leaving behind, her mind already turning toward the uncertain future waiting for her beyond the edge of everything familiar. The old stone bridge appeared ahead of them eventually, moonlight glinting faintly off its weathered stones, and Elena felt a strange, bittersweet pang as she crossed it, remembering the revelations that had unfolded there only weeks earlier. Beyond the bridge, the guards led her along a narrow path that wound deeper into unfamiliar territory, the boundaries of crossland slowly falling away behind her with each passing mile. Elena did not look back again, forcing herself instead to focus entirely on the path ahead, on the uncertain new life waiting for her somewhere beyond the horizon. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever dangers still pursued her through the shadows of these unfamiliar woods, Elena understood now, with a clarity she had never possessed before that terrible night in the Great Hall, that she was no longer simply the rejected girl who had been publicly humiliated and cast aside. She was the last surviving heir of a bloodline that powerful forces had tried desperately to erase, and she intended to survive long enough to understand exactly what that legacy truly meant. The journey toward the border stretched longer than Elena had anticipated, the narrow forest path winding through dense trees that blocked most of the moonlight, forcing the small group to move carefully to avoid tripping over roots and stones hidden in the darkness. The two guards, a stern young man named Oliver and an older woman named Beatrice, moved with practiced silence, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows for any sign of pursuit. Elena struggled to match their pace, her muscles burning from the unfamiliar exertion, her mind still reeling from the abrupt farewell with her mother only an hour earlier. She pushed the grief aside as best she could, focusing instead on the immediate necessity of survival, on placing one foot in front of the other through the tangled undergrowth of the forest floor. They had been walking for nearly 2 hours when Beatrice suddenly raised a hand, signaling for silence. Elena froze instantly, her heart pounding, as she strained to hear whatever had alerted the guard. Faint but unmistakable, the sound of voices drifted through the trees behind them, accompanied by the soft crunch of footsteps moving quickly through the forest. "They've picked up our trail," Oliver whispered, his expression tight with concern. "We need to move faster, or find another way to lose them." Beatrice studied the terrain around them for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she considered their options. "There's a stream a short distance ahead," she said quietly. "If we can reach it and travel along the water for a while, it should help mask our scent and confuse any trackers following us." They pushed forward with renewed urgency, moving as quickly as the darkness and uneven ground would allow. Elena's breath came in ragged gasps, her legs aching with exhaustion, but the fear driving her forward proved stronger than any physical discomfort. Behind them, the voices grew neither closer nor more distant, an unsettling steadiness that suggested their pursuers were skilled trackers. patient, and methodical in their approach. They reached the stream just as the first hints of true dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the water running cold and swift over smooth stones. Without hesitation, Beatrice led them directly into the shallow water, and Elena followed, gasping quietly as the icy cold soaked through her boots and up her legs. They waded carefully along the stream bed for what felt like an eternity, the current tugging at their footing, the cold seeping deeper into Elena's bones with every passing minute. Finally, Beatrice signaled for them to climb out of the water on the opposite bank, well beyond the point where they had entered. They pressed on through the forest, dripping and shivering, until the trees finally began to thin ahead of them, revealing a wide clearing, bathed in the soft gray light of early morning. "This is the border," Oliver said quietly, pointing toward a simple wooden marker embedded in the ground at the clearing's edge. "Beyond this point, we're in neutral territory. Our authority as crossguards ends here." Elena stared at the marker for a long moment, understanding fully that crossing this boundary meant leaving behind not just danger, but everything familiar about her entire life. She glanced back once toward the forest they had just emerged from, wondering if their pursuers were still tracking them, or if the stream had successfully thrown them off the trail. "We should keep moving," Beatrice said gently, noticing Elena's hesitation. "It isn't safe to linger this close to the boundary, even on the neutral side. Your mother gave us instructions for a village several days' journey from here. The sooner we reach it, the sooner you'll be truly safe." Elena nodded, forcing herself to step forward across the invisible boundary that separated everything she had ever known from the uncertain future waiting beyond it. The three of them continued walking as the sun rose fully over the horizon, casting long golden light across unfamiliar countryside that Elena had never before laid eyes upon. They traveled for 3 full days after crossing the border, moving mostly by daylight now that they had put sufficient distance between themselves and any immediate pursuit, though Beatrice and Oliver remained cautious, choosing quieter paths over main roads whenever possible. Elena learned quickly to adapt to the rhythm of travel, her body growing stronger and more accustomed to long hours of walking, though her mind remained constantly occupied with thoughts of her mother, of Damien, of the uncertain life waiting for her ahead. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the sun began sinking low over rolling hills dotted with modest farmhouses, Beatrice finally announced that they were close to their destination. Elena felt a mixture of relief and fresh anxiety at the news, uncertain what kind of welcome awaited her among strangers who had supposedly sheltered allies of her father's family for generations, though none of them had ever met her before. The village, when they finally reached it, proved smaller than Elena had expected, a quiet cluster of stone cottages nestled at the base of a gentle hillside, surrounded by neat gardens and grazing livestock. Smoke curled peacefully from several chimneys, and the soft sounds of evening life drifted through the air, children's laughter, the distant lowing of cattle, the comforting clatter of someone preparing an evening meal. Beatrice led them toward a modest cottage near the center of the village, slightly larger than its neighbors, with carefully tended flower beds lining the front path. She knocked firmly on the wooden door, and after a moment, it opened to reveal an elderly man with kind eyes and a weathered face, who studied the 3 travelers with careful curiosity. "We were told to ask for someone here," Beatrice said, producing the folded paper Ravenna had given Elena before their departure. "A name was written down for us to share." The old man took the paper, reading it slowly, his expression shifting from cautious curiosity to something far more solemn as he reached the final lines. He looked up, his gaze settling directly on Elena, studying her features with an intensity that made her feel suddenly self-conscious. "You have your father's eyes," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I would recognize that shade anywhere, even after all these years." Elena's breath caught in her throat. "You knew my father?" "I knew him well," the old man said, stepping back from the doorway to allow them entry. "My name is Nathaniel. Your father lived in this very village for several years, when he was young, before circumstances eventually led him elsewhere. Please, come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey, and there is much we need to discuss." Elena stepped across the threshold into the warm, humble cottage, feeling a strange mixture of grief and comfort settle over her as she absorbed the reality that she now stood in a place her father had once called home. Nathaniel guided them toward a simple wooden table, gesturing for them to sit while he prepared tea, his movements slow but purposeful. the actions of someone accustomed to welcoming unexpected guests with quiet hospitality. "I received word some weeks ago," Nathaniel said as he worked, "that Ravenna's daughter might eventually need refuge here. I did not expect it to happen quite so soon, or under such urgent circumstances." "You knew this might happen?" Elena asked, surprised. "My mother contacted you directly?" "Not directly," Nathaniel said, settling into a chair across from her once the tea had been prepared. "Marianne serves as something of a messenger between those of us who remember your father's true history, scattered as we are across various territories. She informed several of us, myself included, that the situation had become unstable, and that you might arrive seeking shelter." Elena absorbed this information slowly, beginning to understand the wider network of quiet loyalty that had apparently existed for years, unknown to her, protecting the memory and legacy of her father's bloodline even after his death. "How many people know the truth about who I really am?" she asked. "More than you might expect, yet fewer than would ever pose a genuine threat to your safety, provided we remain careful," Nathaniel said. "This village has sheltered allies of the Ashford family for generations. We understand the importance of discretion better than most." Beatrice and Oliver, satisfied that Elena had reached safety, made preparations to begin their journey back toward Cross territory the following morning, carrying word to Ravenna and Damien that the escape had succeeded without incident. Elena thanked them both sincerely, grateful for their courage in escorting her safely across the dangerous border, though a fresh wave of loneliness settled over her at the realization that soon, even these last familiar faces would depart, leaving her entirely among strangers in an unfamiliar land. That night, after the guards had retired to a nearby cottage offered by one of the villagers, Elena sat alone with Nathaniel beside the crackling fire in his modest home, finally able to ask the questions that had been building within her since Marianne's revelations at the stone bridge weeks earlier. "Tell me about my father," she said softly. "Not the fragments I've learned from letters and second-hand accounts, but the man you actually knew." Nathaniel's expression softened with old affection as he settled deeper into his chair, the firelight casting warm shadows across his weathered features. "Edmund was quiet," he began, thoughtful in a way that seemed unusual for someone his age. "He carried the weight of his family's tragedy long before he fully understood the details of what had happened to them, but he was also remarkably resilient, determined to build a meaningful life despite everything that had been stolen from him." As Nathaniel spoke, sharing memories and stories that painted a fuller, richer picture of the father Elena had barely known, she felt something inside her beginning to heal, slowly, the grief of recent weeks mixing gradually with a growing sense of connection to a legacy she was only beginning to understand. Whatever dangers still awaited her, whatever uncertain future lay ahead in this unfamiliar village, Elena felt, for the first time since that terrible night in the Great Hall, that she was finally beginning to understand who she truly was. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm unlike anything Elena had known in her previous life. Nathaniel offered her a small room within his cottage, and in exchange, Elena began helping with the daily tasks that kept the household running, tending the garden, assisting with meals, learning the quiet routines of village life that felt worlds away from the political intrigue and hidden agreements that had shaped her existence back in Cross territory. At first, she moved through these days in a kind of numb fog, still processing the enormity of everything that had happened, the loss of her old life pressing constantly at the edges of her thoughts. But gradually, as the days turned into weeks, Elena found herself adapting, discovering unexpected strength within herself that she had never needed to access before. Nathaniel introduced her carefully to a few trusted villagers, explaining her situation in the vaguest possible terms, simply as a young woman who needed a quiet place to rebuild her life after difficult circumstances. Most accepted this explanation without question, welcoming Elena with the same easy hospitality they extended to any newcomer, and slowly, she began forming genuine connections with people who knew nothing of Alpha Kings, or Luna Crowns, or ancient bloodline conflicts. One such connection formed with a young woman named Clara, who lived in the cottage neighboring Nathaniel's and worked as a healer for the village, skilled in herbal remedies and practical medicine. Clara possessed a warm, curious nature that drew Elena out of her isolation, and the two quickly became close friends, spending afternoons together, as Clara taught Elena the basics of identifying medicinal plants and preparing simple remedies. You have good instincts for this, Clara commented one afternoon as they worked together in the small garden behind her cottage, sorting through freshly harvested herbs. Careful hands, patient attention to detail. Have you ever considered this kind of work before? Elena smiled, genuinely pleased by the compliment. Never, she admitted. My life before coming here was quite different. I never imagined myself doing anything like this. Well, you're a natural, Clara said with an easy grin. Perhaps this was simply waiting for you to discover it. Elena found herself returning to that thought often in the weeks that followed. The strange possibility that the life she was building here, humble and quiet as it was, might hold more genuine fulfillment than the political marriage and royal title she had once believed herself destined for. There was a freedom in this anonymity that she had never experienced before, the ability to simply exist as herself, without the weight of expectations tied to bloodlines and betrothals and ancient debts. Still, the danger that had driven her from her home never fully faded from her thoughts. Nathaniel maintained careful vigilance, occasionally receiving quiet word from Marianne or other allies about movements within the Southern Rebellion, updates that Elena absorbed with a mixture of anxiety and grim determination. She learned, over time, that the rebellion factions had grown increasingly bold in recent months, their rhetoric focusing more explicitly on restoring old bloodlines to power, using the historical injustice of the Ashford Purge as a rallying cry for their broader political ambitions. They don't actually care about you as a person, Nathaniel explained one evening, as they discussed the latest news over a simple dinner. To them, you represent a symbol, a justification for the conflict they wish to pursue against Cross leadership. Whether that serves your genuine interests or not matters little to their broader strategy. And if Cross leadership discovers I'm alive and being used as a symbol against them, Elena asked, voicing a fear that had been building steadily in recent weeks. What happens then? Nathaniel's expression grew grave. Then the danger to you multiplies considerably, he admitted honestly. Damien's father may have felt genuine guilt over the Ashford Purge, enough to arrange protection for you as a child. But not everyone within Cross leadership shares that same sense of obligation. Should the wider pack come to view you as a political threat, rather than an innocent victim of old history, you may find yourself facing enemies on multiple fronts simultaneously. The weight of this warning settled heavily over Elena in the following days, and she found herself training with renewed purpose, alongside the physical work she had already been undertaking around the village. Nathaniel, it turned out, possessed considerable skill in combat techniques passed down from his own years, serving as a guard for displaced Ashford allies decades earlier, and he began teaching Elena the basics of self-defense during quiet evening hours after her other daily tasks were complete. You may never need these skills, Nathaniel told her during one such lesson, as she practiced blocking a series of slow, careful strikes he directed toward her. But if the day comes when you do, I would rather you possess at least some ability to protect yourself, rather than relying entirely on others. Elena threw herself into the training with genuine dedication, finding an unexpected sense of empowerment in the physical discipline, a stark contrast to the powerlessness she had felt standing frozen in the great hall on the night of her humiliation. Each bruise earned during practice, each small improvement in her technique, felt like a quiet reclamation of agency over her own life, a refusal to simply remain a passive victim of circumstances orchestrated entirely by others. Months passed in this manner, Elena settling gradually into a rhythm that blended quiet village life with careful vigilance against distant but persistent danger. She formed friendships beyond Clara and Nathaniel as well, including an unexpected connection with a rogue wolf named Victor who occasionally passed through the village on trading routes, carrying news and goods between various neutral territories. Victor belonged to no formal pack, having left his birth pack years earlier over disagreements with its leadership, and his independent perspective on pack politics offered Elena a refreshing outside view on the conflicts that had shaped her own life. Pack loyalty is a strange thing, Victor commented one evening, sharing a meal with Elena and several other villagers during one of his periodic visits. People devote their entire lives to protecting bloodlines and titles, yet so few ever stop to ask whether those structures actually serve the people living within them, or simply perpetuate cycles of conflict that benefit only those already holding power. Elena found herself increasingly drawn to such perspectives, the growing realization that the political struggle consuming so much of her attention, The battle between Cross leadership and Southern rebellion factions ultimately represented competing visions of power rather than any genuine concern for justice or the well-being of ordinary pack members. Her father's bloodline, the Ashford legacy that others sought either to erase or exploit, mattered to her now, not as a political tool, but as a personal connection to a history and heritage that was uniquely her own. She wrote occasional letters to her mother during this period, carefully coded messages passed through Nathaniel's network of trusted contacts, sharing small updates about her new life, while avoiding any details that might compromise her location, should the letters somehow fall into the wrong hands. Ravenna's responses, when they arrived, carried careful warmth mixed with lingering worry, updates about pack politics back in Cross territory that suggested tensions were continuing to build, though nothing had yet erupted into open conflict. Damien appeared occasionally in these letters as well, mentioned briefly by her mother, in ways that suggested he continued monitoring the political situation carefully, working quietly behind the scenes to protect Elena's safety, even from a distance. Elena found her feelings about him growing increasingly complicated during this period of separation, the initial fury over her public humiliation gradually softening into something more nuanced as she came to understand the impossible position he had faced, forced to enact his father's plan, despite whatever personal feelings he might have held. One evening, nearly 6 months after her arrival in the village, Nathaniel received word that troubled him more deeply than any previous update. He called Elena into his study after the evening meal, his expression grave, as he shared the latest news gathered through his careful network of allies. "The Southern Rebellion has grown considerably bolder," he said, spreading a rough map across his desk that marked various territories and the shifting boundaries of political influence. "They've begun openly recruiting from disaffected pack members across multiple territories, using rhetoric about restoring the Ashford legacy as a central pillar of their movement. Word has reached them, Elena, that a surviving heir may still exist somewhere beyond Cross territory." Elena's stomach twisted with familiar dread at this news. "They know I'm alive?" "They suspect it," Nathaniel clarified. "Rumors have been circulating, though your exact location and identity remain unconfirmed as far as I can determine. But suspicion alone may prove sufficient to drive increased searching, increased risk to your safety here." "What should we do?" Elena asked, her mind already racing through possibilities, remembering the careful lessons in self-defense, the growing strength and confidence she had built during her months in the village. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment, something calculating and thoughtful behind his weathered expression. "I believe," he said finally, "that the time may be approaching when hiding is no longer the safest path forward. Sometimes, Elena, the only way to diffuse a dangerous symbol is to control the narrative surrounding it yourself, rather than allowing others to shape it according to their own ambitions." Elena absorbed this suggestion slowly, understanding the implication behind his careful words. The quiet life she had built here, however genuinely fulfilling it had become, might soon need to give way to something far more dangerous and consequential. The question of what role she might eventually need to play in the growing conflict between Cross leadership and Southern rebellion factions loomed larger with each passing day, and Elena understood, with growing certainty, that the choice of how to face that future would ultimately need to be entirely her own. The warning arrived faster than anyone in the village had anticipated. Barely a week after Nathaniel's grave conversation with Elena about the growing boldness of the Southern Rebellion, a rider appeared at the edge of the village late one evening, his horse lathered with sweat, his face grim with urgency. Elena recognized him immediately as one of Damien's trusted messengers, a young guard named Lucas, who had occasionally carried correspondence between Cross territory and Nathaniel's network over the preceding months. "They know," Lucas said breathlessly, dismounting quickly and approaching Nathaniel's cottage, where Elena stood waiting on the front step, drawn outside by the commotion of the rider's arrival. A spy within the rebellion's ranks confirmed it. "They've traced rumors to this general region. Alpha Damien sent me ahead immediately, but he believes armed riders may already be moving toward this village." Elena's heart lurched painfully in her chest. "How much time do we have?" "Perhaps a day, perhaps less," Lucas said, his breathing still ragged from the hard ride. "Damien is following closely behind me, with a small group of trusted guards, but he feared I would not arrive in time to warn you otherwise, if he waited to travel together." Nathaniel's expression hardened with immediate resolve, years of careful preparation for exactly this scenario finally coming into sharp focus. "We need to move quickly," he said, already turning to gather essential supplies from within his cottage. "Elena, gather only what you absolutely need. We cannot risk remaining here any longer than necessary." Elena rushed to her small room, her hands trembling, as she stuffed clothing and essential items into the same worn leather bag she had carried from cross territory months earlier. The wooden box containing the letter and pendant went in first, as it always did, followed by practical supplies for travel. She paused only briefly, glancing around the small room that had become genuinely home to her over the preceding months, feeling a fresh wave of grief at the thought of abandoning this quiet, hard-won stability once again. Clara arrived at the cottage moments later, having heard the commotion and immediately understanding, without needing lengthy explanation, that Elena's departure had suddenly become urgent. "I packed some supplies," she said, pressing a small bundle of medicinal herbs and bandages into Elena's hands. "Whatever happens out there, these might prove useful." "Thank you," Elena said, embracing her friend tightly, unexpected tears stinging her eyes at the thought of leaving behind the genuine connections she had built here. "For everything. For teaching me, for your friendship, for treating me like a normal person rather than a political symbol." "You are a normal person," Clara said firmly, pulling back to meet Elena's eyes with fierce sincerity. "Whatever bloodline you carry, whatever history surrounds your birth, none of that changes who you actually are. Remember that, Elena, no matter what happens next." The words settled deeply within Elena as she finished her preparations, a reminder she would carry forward through whatever dangers awaited beyond the safety of this quiet village. Within the hour, Nathaniel had arranged for a small group of trusted villagers to accompany them toward a more defensible location, a series of caves, several hours' journey into the surrounding hills, that had apparently served as emergency refuge for generations of Ashford allies whenever danger threatened. They departed under cover of darkness, moving quickly through unfamiliar terrain guided by Nathaniel's careful knowledge of the surrounding landscape. Elena's muscles, strengthened by months of physical training, carried her steadily through the difficult journey, though fear for those she was leaving behind, and uncertainty about what awaited them at their destination, weighed heavily on her thoughts throughout the long hours of travel. They reached the cave system just as dawn began breaking over the eastern hills, the entrance cleverly concealed behind a screen of dense vegetation that would be nearly impossible to locate without specific knowledge of its existence. Nathaniel led them inside, and Elena found herself in a surprisingly spacious chamber, clearly maintained and stocked with emergency supplies over the years, in careful anticipation of exactly this kind of crisis. "We should be safe here temporarily," Nathaniel said, though the tension in his voice suggested he understood. This safety remained fragile at best. "Damien and his guards know this location as an emergency meeting point, should the need for it ever arise. We wait here now, and hope he arrives before the rebellion forces manage to track us this far." The hours that followed stretched with agonizing tension, every distant sound outside the cave entrance sending fresh waves of alarm through the small group huddled within its shadowed depths. Elena found herself unable to sit still, pacing the confines of the chamber, her mind cycling through worst-case scenarios, despite her best efforts to remain calm and composed. It was nearly midday when the sound of approaching horses finally broke the tense silence, and Nathaniel motioned urgently for everyone to remain quiet and hidden deeper within the cave's shadows. Elena's heart pounded painfully as she strained to identify the voices drifting faintly from outside the concealed entrance, unable to determine immediately whether salvation or disaster had finally arrived. "Elena." The voice, when it finally became distinguishable, belonged unmistakably to Damien, urgent and searching. "It's safe, it's me." Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully that her knees nearly buckled beneath her. She rushed toward the cave entrance, emerging cautiously into the daylight, to find Damien dismounting quickly from his horse, his expression carrying visible relief mixed with lingering worry as his eyes found hers across the small clearing. "You made it," he said, closing the distance between them with quick, purposeful strides. "Thank the moon, you're safe." "For now," Elena said, though something in his presence, in the genuine concern etched across his familiar features, offered a comfort she had not realized she desperately needed. "How close are they, the rebellion forces?" Damien's expression grew grim once more. "Closer than I would like," he admitted. We managed to delay their progress somewhat by spreading false information about your possible location, but I don't believe that deception will hold much longer. We need a more permanent solution than simply hiding in caves and villages, Elena. What kind of solution? Elena asked, though something in his tone suggested he had already been considering this question carefully during his journey to reach her. Damien glanced around at the small group gathered near the cave entrance, Nathaniel and the trusted villagers who had helped Elena escape, before returning his full attention to her. I believe, he said carefully, that the time has come to stop hiding your identity entirely, and instead, control how the truth becomes known publicly, before the rebellion factions have the opportunity to twist it entirely to their own advantage. Elena felt a chill run through her at the magnitude of what he was suggesting. You mean announce publicly that I'm alive, that I'm the Ashford heir? I mean exactly that, Damien confirmed. If we continue allowing rumors and speculation to spread unchecked, the rebellion will shape the narrative entirely according to their own ambitions, painting you as either a martyred symbol or a weapon to be claimed for their cause. But if you step forward yourself, on your own terms, claiming your heritage openly and clearly stating your own intentions, you take that power away from them. And what happens to me then? Elena asked, her voice carrying genuine fear, despite her determination not to appear weak in this critical moment. Once my identity becomes fully public, won't that simply invite even more danger from every direction? Perhaps, Damien admitted honestly, but it also offers you something you've never truly had throughout this entire ordeal, Elena. Control over your own story, rather than remaining a secret that others fight to either protect or exploit, according to their own agendas. Elena absorbed this proposal slowly, feeling the weight of the decision settling heavily upon her shoulders. Months of hiding, of quiet vigilance, of building a fragile new life, always shadowed by the threat of discovery, had led inexorably toward this moment of choice. She could continue running, continue hiding, hoping desperately that safety might eventually be found somewhere beyond the reach of both Cross leadership and Southern rebellion ambitions. Or she could step forward, claim her heritage openly, and attempt to shape her own destiny, rather than remaining passive amid forces far larger than herself. If I do this, Elena said slowly, working through the implications even as she spoke them aloud, what would it actually mean, practically? Where would I go? What would I say? Damien's expression grew thoughtful, and Elena sensed he had already given considerable thought to these very questions during his urgent journey to reach her. There is a gathering scheduled soon, he said, a council meeting between multiple pack leaders across the northern and central territories, called specifically to address the growing instability caused by rebellion movements in the south. If you were to appear there, publicly, claiming your true identity, and clearly stating that you seek neither to reclaim political power, nor to serve as any faction's rallying symbol, it might diffuse much of the danger surrounding your existence. You want me to walk into a room full of pack leaders and tell them I'm the last surviving Ashford heir, Elena said slowly, and simply hope they believe I have no interest in reclaiming whatever power that bloodline once held? I want you to have the chance to tell your own story, on your own terms, Damien said firmly, rather than allowing others to continue deciding your fate without your input, exactly as happened the night of our ceremony. I owe you that much, Elena, at the very least. Elena studied his face for a long moment, searching for any trace of deception or hidden agenda, finding instead only genuine sincerity mixed with lingering guilt over his role in her earlier humiliation. Whatever complicated history existed between them, whatever painful choices circumstances had forced upon both of them, she believed, in this moment, that his concern for her safety and autonomy was genuine. And if the council doesn't believe me, she asked, if they see me instead as exactly the threat the rebellion hopes to exploit? Then we will face that challenge together, when it arrives, Damien said. But I don't believe you should continue hiding indefinitely, Elena. Always one step ahead of danger, never truly safe, never truly free to build the life you actually want. This may be difficult, and it may be dangerous. But I believe it offers you the best chance at genuine safety and genuine freedom, rather than an eternity of careful concealment. Elena turned to look at Nathaniel, silently seeking his counsel on this monumental decision. The old man studied her carefully for a long moment, before offering a slow, thoughtful nod. Your father spent his entire adult life hiding from a truth he never chose, Nathaniel said quietly. I have often wondered whether things might have unfolded differently for him, had he possessed the opportunity to claim his heritage openly, rather than remaining forever in the shadows. The choice, of course, remains entirely yours, Elena, but I believe Damien's proposal carries genuine merit. Elena closed her eyes for a long moment, feeling the weight of generations pressing down upon this single decision: her father's stolen legacy, her mother's years of careful protection. The quiet life she had built here in this village, now threatened regardless of what choice she made. When she finally opened her eyes again, she found Damien watching her with an expression of patient, genuine respect, waiting for her decision, without attempting to pressure her further. "All right," Elena said finally, her voice steady despite the fear still churning within her. "I'll do it. I'll claim my heritage publicly. But I need you to understand something first, Damien. Whatever happens at this council meeting, whatever comes of this decision, I intend to make my own choices going forward. No more agreements made on my behalf without my knowledge or consent. No more sacrifices decided by others while I remain uninformed until the moment of consequence." "Understood," Damien said, something that looked almost like admiration flickering across his features. "This time, Elena, the choice is entirely yours." The council gathering took place 10 days later, hosted in neutral territory at a grand stone hall, built specifically for the rare occasions when pack leaders from across the northern and central territories gathered to address matters affecting the wider region. Elena stood outside the tall wooden doors, her heart pounding, with a nervousness that reminded her uncomfortably of the night in the great hall months earlier. Though the stakes today felt even higher, the consequences even more far-reaching. Damien stood beside her, dressed formally as befitted his status as Alpha King, though his attention remained focused entirely on Elena rather than the gathered dignitaries waiting beyond the doors. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. One final offer of escape should her resolve waver at this final threshold. "We can still find another path forward, if you've changed your mind." "I haven't changed my mind," Elena said, though her voice carried a slight tremor she couldn't quite suppress. "I need to do this, Damien. For my father, for my mother, for myself." At that moment, the sound of quick footsteps approaching from down the corridor drew their attention, and Elena turned to see her mother hurrying toward them, having traveled separately to arrive in time for this pivotal gathering. Ravenna embraced her daughter tightly, tears glistening in her eyes, despite the careful composure she maintained, as Luna of Cross territory. "I am so proud of you," Ravenna whispered against Elena's hair. "Whatever happens beyond these doors, know that your father would be proud as well." Elena held onto her mother for a long moment, drawing strength from the embrace before finally pulling back and turning toward the tall wooden doors that separated her from the most consequential moment of her entire life. Nathaniel had traveled with them as well, along with Clara, both insisting on witnessing this pivotal moment after everything they had shared together during Elena's months of hiding. The doors opened, and Elena stepped forward into the grand hall, her chin lifted with a confidence she had cultivated through months of quiet strength-building, physical training, and hard-won self-discovery. The gathered pack leaders, representatives from a dozen different territories, turned to observe her entrance with visible curiosity, clearly uncertain about the identity of this unexpected addition to their carefully planned council session. Damien moved to the front of the hall, addressing the assembled leaders with the formal authority of his position. "Honored Council," he began, "I have called this gathering to address not only the growing instability caused by rebellion movements in the southern territories, but also to introduce someone whose existence has become central to that very instability." Murmurs rippled through the gathered leaders as Damien gestured for Elena to step forward. She walked toward the center of the hall, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her, remembering the humiliation of standing in a similar position months earlier, though this time, she reminded herself firmly, she stood here entirely by her own choice, claiming her own truth, rather than having judgment passed upon her by others. "My name is Elena Voss," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, steadier than she had believed possible given the magnitude of the moment. "But that is not the only name I carry. I am also the last surviving heir of the Ashford bloodline, a family that many of you likely believed had been entirely erased generations ago." The murmurs grew louder now, shock and disbelief rippling visibly across the faces of the assembled leaders. Elena pressed forward despite the reaction, determined to complete her statement, before allowing questions or objections to interrupt her carefully prepared words. "I understand that my existence has become a source of political tension," she continued, "exploited by rebellion factions, seeking to use my bloodline as justification for conflict, and perhaps feared by others, who worry I might seek to reclaim power, or influence, that was stripped from my family, generations ago. I stand before you today to state clearly and unequivocally that I seek neither. I have no desire to lead a rebellion, no ambition to reclaim political power through violence or manipulation. I seek only the right to exist safely, to live my own life according to my own choices, free from the schemes of those who would use my heritage for purposes I never chose." A tense silence followed her declaration, the gathered leaders absorbing the weight of her words, some exchanging uncertain glances, while others studied Elena, with expressions ranging from skepticism to genuine curiosity. Finally, an older woman near the front of the assembly rose from her seat, her expression carefully neutral. "How can we trust that your intentions remain as you claim?" she asked. "Bloodlines carry weight, regardless of individual intention, young woman. Your very existence, whether you seek power or not, provides ammunition for those who do." Elena had anticipated this challenge, had spent long hours during her journey to the council preparing her response. "You are correct that I cannot control how others choose to interpret or exploit my existence," she said. "But I can control my own actions, my own choices, and I intend to make those choices publicly and transparently, precisely so that no one can claim to speak on my behalf without my knowledge or consent. I am not asking for your trust blindly. I am asking for the opportunity to earn it, through my actions rather than empty promises." Another leader, a younger man Elena did not recognize, spoke up from his position near the side of the hall. "And what of the rebellion factions themselves? Now that your existence has become publicly known, do you believe they will simply abandon their cause because you have declared your own lack of political ambition?" "Perhaps not entirely," Elena admitted honestly, "but I believe that removing the mystery surrounding my existence removes much of their power to manipulate public opinion through speculation and rumor. I am not a symbol waiting to be claimed by whoever reaches me first. I am a person, with my own voice, my own choices, and my own clearly stated intentions. That truth, spoken openly, carries more power against manipulation than continued secrecy ever could." The debate continued for nearly an hour, various pack leaders raising concerns, challenging Elena's sincerity, questioning the wisdom of Damien's decision to bring this matter before the full council, rather than handling it through quieter diplomatic channels. Elena answered each challenge as honestly and directly as she could, drawing on the strength and clarity she had cultivated during her months of hiding and self-discovery, refusing to allow fear or intimidation to shake her carefully composed resolve. Eventually, as the discussion began winding toward its natural conclusion, an elder statesman who had remained silent throughout most of the proceedings finally rose to speak, his voice carrying the weight of decades of experience and wisdom. "I remember the Ashford Purge," he said quietly, and the hall fell immediately silent at this unexpected personal testimony. "I was young then, but I remember the injustice of it clearly, the political maneuvering disguised as necessary security, the innocent lives destroyed, in service of consolidating power that should never have been consolidated so completely." He turned to look directly at Elena, his expression carrying genuine sympathy mixed with careful consideration. "I believe this young woman speaks with sincerity," he continued. "And I believe that continuing to treat her existence as a dangerous secret, rather than acknowledging the historical injustice her family suffered, and allowing her the dignity of living openly, according to her own choices, serves only to perpetuate exactly the kind of political manipulation the rebellion factions currently exploit." His words seemed to shift something within the gathered assembly, murmurs of consideration replacing the earlier skepticism and challenge. Slowly, one by one, other leaders began voicing tentative support, acknowledging that Elena's public declaration, however unprecedented, might genuinely offer the best path toward diffusing the growing instability that had been building across the southern territories. By the time the council session finally concluded, hours later, a fragile but genuine consensus had emerged. Elena's existence and heritage would be formally acknowledged across the assembled territories, along with clear public statements from multiple pack leaders confirming her stated lack of political ambition. The rebellion factions, deprived of the mystery and speculation that had fueled much of their growing support, would find their rallying cause significantly weakened, though the council acknowledged this would not eliminate the danger entirely, only reduce it to more manageable levels. As the gathered leaders began departing the Grand Hall, Elena finally allowed herself to release the tension she had been carrying throughout the exhausting proceedings, her shoulders sagging slightly with relief, as her mother rushed forward to embrace her once again. "You did it," Ravenna whispered, pride evident in every word. "You truly did it, Elena." Nathaniel and Clara joined them moments later, both offering warm congratulations, and even Victor, who had traveled separately to witness the historic council session, appeared with a rare, genuine smile of approval. Elena accepted their embraces and kind words, with genuine gratitude, feeling for the first time in many months that the future ahead of her, however uncertain it remained in its details, no longer carried the same suffocating weight of fear and secrecy that had defined so much of her recent life. Damien approached last, standing slightly apart from the joyful reunion, watching Elena with an expression that carried both relief and something more complicated, unspoken feelings that had been building steadily throughout the months of their difficult, complicated history together. "You were remarkable in there," he said quietly, once the others had given them a small measure of privacy. "I don't believe anyone in that hall expected such composure and conviction." "I had good reason to find that conviction," Elena said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Months of hiding, of running, of watching people I care about risk everything to protect me. I was done letting others decide my fate without my voice being heard." "I owe you an apology," Damien said, his voice carrying genuine sincerity now, free from the political formality that had characterized so much of their earlier interactions. "Not just for the humiliation of that ceremony months ago, though certainly for that as well, but for every moment since then, when I allowed circumstances and old agreements to dictate choices that should have included your voice from the very beginning." Elena studied him for a long moment, considering the complicated journey that had led them both to this particular moment, standing together in the aftermath of a council session that had fundamentally altered the trajectory of both their lives. "I appreciate that," she said finally, "but Damien, I think we both need time to understand what comes next, individually, and perhaps eventually together, without the weight of old agreements and inherited obligations shaping every decision we make." "Agreed," Damien said, something that looked almost like hope flickering behind his careful composure. "Whatever happens next, Elena, I want you to know that it will be your choice, entirely and completely, without any hidden agreements or unspoken expectations." In the weeks that followed the historic council session, Elena found herself navigating a strange new reality, no longer hidden but not entirely free from the complicated political dynamics that had shaped her entire life. She returned briefly to cross territory, reuniting properly with old friends like Grace, who had spent months worrying over her sudden and unexplained disappearance. She spent considerable time with her mother, finally hearing the full, unguarded truth about her father's life and legacy, no longer filtered through careful protective secrecy. Eventually, Elena made the choice to return to Nathaniel's village, at least temporarily, drawn back to the quiet life and genuine friendships she had built there during her months of hiding. Clara welcomed her back with genuine joy, and their friendship continued deepening as Elena resumed her informal apprenticeship in herbal medicine, discovering that this quiet, meaningful work brought her genuine satisfaction, unlike anything she had previously imagined for her own future. The Southern Rebellion, as the council had anticipated, did not disappear entirely following Elena's public declaration, but its momentum weakened considerably, without the mysterious, unclaimed symbol it had previously exploited. Small pockets of resistance continued simmering across various territories, but the widespread instability that had once threatened to erupt into full conflict gradually settled into a more manageable, if still occasionally tense, political landscape. Damien visited the village periodically over the following months, their relationship evolving slowly and carefully, free now from the weight of arranged obligations and inherited political agreements. Elena found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, genuinely looking forward to these visits, discovering a version of Damien she had never fully known before, thoughtful and considerate, in ways that the formal constraints of his position had previously obscured. One evening, nearly a year after the night of her original humiliation in the Great Hall, Elena stood once again at the edge of the old stone bridge where Marianne had first revealed the truth of her father's legacy, watching the sunset paint brilliant colors across the sky above the quiet river. Damien stood beside her, having traveled to the village specifically for this visit, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply absorbing the peaceful beauty of the moment together. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "The choice to publicly reject me, all those months ago? Even knowing now how everything eventually turned out." Damien considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret the pain it caused you," he said honestly. "I regret that circumstances forced us into such a painful, public performance, rather than allowing us the honesty we both deserved from the beginning. But I don't regret where we eventually arrived, Elena. This version of our story, however difficult the path to reach it, feels far more genuine than anything that might have unfolded if we had simply proceeded with the original arranged betrothal." Elena nodded slowly, understanding fully the truth in his words. The girl who had stood humiliated in that great hall months earlier had been shaped by expectations and agreements entirely outside her own control, her identity defined by others, long before she had the opportunity to discover it for herself. The woman standing here now, at the edge of this quiet bridge, watching the sunset, with a man she was slowly, genuinely coming to know on her own terms, felt like someone entirely different. Someone who had claimed her own story, through courage, resilience, and an unwavering refusal to remain merely a passive symbol in someone else's political calculations. "I think," Elena said softly, reaching for the crescent moon pendant she now wore openly around her neck, no longer hidden as a dangerous secret, but displayed proudly as a symbol of the heritage she had finally reclaimed, that everything happened exactly as it needed to, however painful the journey. My father's legacy, my mother's sacrifice, even your difficult choice that night in the Great Hall, all of it led me here, to this moment, to a life I finally chose entirely for myself." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the old stone bridge into gentle twilight shadow, Elena felt a profound sense of peace settle over her, hard-won and genuinely earned through months of struggle, discovery, and courage. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whatever complicated political landscape continued shifting across the northern and southern territories, she understood now, with complete and unshakable certainty, that her future belonged entirely to her, shaped by her own choices rather than the secrets and schemes of others. The rejected girl who had once stood humiliated before an entire pack had finally become someone far stronger, someone who had claimed not just her hidden heritage, but her own voice, her own destiny, and her own genuine happiness, earned through every difficult step of the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this quiet, peaceful moment, beside the old stone bridge, where her true story had first begun to unfold.